All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Jose Fallon, and welcome to Working with Reddit Data from the UK Data Service. So let's get into it. We start with a pretty quick warning. We won't actually be scraping any live data today, but I leave this slide in because obviously, if we're going to be doing stuff like sentiment analysis of live data, when you go around and do your own explorations, you might find, if you sort by negative sentiment, you can very quickly find some pretty grotesque, racist, sexist, homophobic stuff, and beyond. So that's just a general warning for that, but we shouldn't be seeing anything today beyond controversial opinions on coffee and tea as drinks. So that should be okay. And over this talk, we're going to cover generally just why social media data is useful and some of the common problems with using it. We'll discuss Twitter first. That used to be my preferred social media to scrape, and now Reddit as my new preferred social media to scrape, just to address some of those common issues. We'll introduce the very simple basics of text pre-processing and sentiment analysis. And then we'll finish up with a demo on how to actually scrape some data from Reddit using Python and how to perform some simple analysis of that scraped data. Though again, it will all be fake data, not real data I'm scraping, but it will have the correct structure. And with your API keys, you should be able to get real data and code along if you wanted to. So to start with, let's talk about why social media data is a useful source at all. When we analyze an individual, we usually reduce them to a set of facts at the time of data collection. So we might find out their age today, their birthday, their salary, some qualitative views like voting preferences. They may be living in one city but planning to move to another country in a few months, and then our data would become outdated. So the question I try and answer here is how could we be a bit more accurate than this and have a sort of evolving image of an individual? So my ideal data set is one that's more flexible, high quantity, not quality, and long form. And in a perfect world, I'd like to collect that data on those changing opinions in real time if I wanted to over very, very long time scales. And I'd really want to collect it from a large data set of users. I don't just want to see one user, I want to see thousands of users. And this way, even if the data that we were getting was kind of low quality or random, we could probably find users out of millions that were relevant to what we're trying to study. And an added benefit for me would be if that data was free. So my suggestion here is that using social media data for research has a lot of these advantages. We can get samples from millions of users realistically. It is effectively free, but that's a complicated legal, ethical issue, and that is changing every single day, as I'll go into later. Um, each social media data set comes with its own bias. Obviously, each social media platform represents different groups of people. The users from Tumblr are very different to the users on Reddit, to the users on Twitter, to the users on Facebook. Reddit on Twitter, for example, are very overwhelmingly American in what they explore and talk about. Uh, we have no idea who each of those users are, but they will self-profess some things like location and gender. And again, these might be realistic, they might be accurate, but they might be out of date, they might be sarcastic, they might be idealized. If someone wants to live in another country, they might set their location to be that new country. So you can't just trust them on what they say. Um, Another benefit is that quantity. Active users have posted thousands of times, probably over the last 10 to 20 years. There'll be short, snappy comments. There'll be very vulnerable and intimate comments there. There might even be essays on very niche topics, for example. And some users love that anonymity of social media, which means that they can sort of speak more freely and say things that they might not say in the real world, they might not say in an interview, for example. So you'd hope that people are a little bit more authentic, but obviously that comes with all of the noise that the internet provides as well. So originally this talk was called Working with Twitter Data, and that's had to change over the years because Twitter data is no longer really freely accessible to academics. So I sort of start by talking about that, but don't worry, you are in Working with Reddit Data, and I will be talking about Reddit data very shortly. So this is a tweet, a single message on Twitter at the time this talk was made, or now X. And collecting a large number of these tweets was a very technical and expensive process, which is kind of a shame because if we're doing a little bit of text analysis, tweets were kind of perfect for being short, succinct views on very niche topics, right? You could search for a hashtag and you would get 100-character tweets talking about an individual thing like tea or coffee. So you sort of get these very condensed, like strong sentiment textual sentences that were super useful. And again, I'll talk now about how great Twitter data used to be for social sciences, but apologies, it's not really something you can use now. So individual tweets are all timestamped. They often had location associated with them. If there was a picture, there would be metadata from the picture confirming that that user was in the country, at least when that tweet was made. And a lot of tweets aren't in replies to other tweets. I think about 50% of tweets are a reply to another one, which means that you could explicitly ask for sort of individual non-reply tweets, and you wouldn't need the context of the tweets before it or the messages before it. So because many tweets aren't in reply to another one, it should be encapsulated in that hopefully all the context you need is within that single tweet. The big disadvantage, though, as I say, Twitter used to be free for academics. It used to be what I would give this talk about and preach about for many years. It used to be able to collect 10 million tweets a month, which would reset at the end of each month. So you could get another year. You could get data from different sources. Now, sadly, to scrape the same amount in 2025, you would need a budget of 50,000 US dollars each month to get the same data. Um, and the point to remember here is that when we talk about Reddit data, you should use it while you can, because maybe in 1 or 2 years, you won't be able to get that data again. And whatever your research topic is, if you plan on using Reddit data, don't make promises that say you will compare this year's data to next year's data. Make the promise that you might compare this year's data to last year's data, for example, because that just might not be the case in a year, sadly. So to quickly summarize Twitter's use as a social media data set, it's incredibly expensive now. The context was really good, the length was really good, but any of those user professed features were basically completely unreliable. It's not really a good data set unless you want very generic opinions and views and ideas. But you can't say, get all of the users from London and compare them to all of the users from Manchester very easily. So instead, today I'm here recommending Reddit data. Reddit is my new favorite source of social media data. I avoided it before because of those contextual problems. Almost every single comment on Reddit is in reply to a post title. So if that post title was something like, "What is your favorite drink?" you might just find 1,000 comments that say the word tea or say the word coffee. And those messages alone, without the context of the title, it can be fairly meaningless. And then you don't tend to get 1,000 top level comments. You tend to get a top level comment and then someone arguing with them and someone arguing with them. And really, to trace the entire context, you have to flatten that tree structure down, um, and sort of trust the comments in order. And it's more complicated than it seems, basically. But again, at a top level and at an entry level, you can just explore that data from from the first scrape. There's no character limit, so one comment might just say coffee or tea, but another comment might be 1,000 words on why coffee or tea is better than the other one. I should probably pick a side. I'm going to go with tea first because I prefer tea. But yeah, I might write a big essay on why tea is better than coffee, for example. And depending on the metrics we're tracking, like how many positive words there are, if that was your way of measuring positivity or negativity, then a long text would just have more positivity than a short text, for example. So it's something to be aware of. And then same as Twitter, Reddit users can claim they have a location, they can claim gender, they can claim all sorts of different things that might not represent who they are in real life, might represent who they want to be, but you definitely can't base your research question just on the self-professed qualities that are on Reddit. Sorry, I see messages are coming in. If there are any urgent questions, feel free to, maybe Jill or Julia, you can let me know, but I'll just carry on. There'll be questions at the end anyway, so any good ones I'll get mentioned to later. Right, so comparing Twitter and Reddit now, as I said, Twitter was more accessible. It was, to me, a better data source for these initial explorations, really good for research. Thanks to those recent pricing changes, they've basically killed that as a research avenue in my eyes. Reddit is a viable alternative. It's a lot easier to scrape, but it's a little bit tricky as well. It does definitely require someone or yourself to be quite technical, basically. But what I'm trying to give you today is something that will let you scrape an entire subreddit or 100 posts from a subreddit with a little bit of Python knowledge, basically. So you shouldn't have to write any new code. You'll just have to get an API key from Reddit, which I'll also go through. I've been quite optimistic there. Maybe I haven't anymore. this world has changed so much in the last few years, but to me, that's kind of optimistic. Let's talk briefly about the way these social medias have changed over time and the way the data access has changed over time. Yeah, I'm going to drink some water before this. There's a lot here. Right. Over the last 10 years, social media has been a very turbulent topic. It's claimed that elections have been intentionally manipulated. Famously, Cambridge Analytica scandal started with Facebook data. Twitter, now X, has been taken over by the richest man in the world to such impact that this entire talk dedicated for pro-social research can no longer be applied to Twitter. Reddit, while accessible, revoked recently their third-party application access, which basically meant that people who needed help reading Reddit data, maybe they didn't have very good vision, they used different third-party apps, and those were basically closed overnight. And then slowest to act, we have government intervention. UK very recently blocked all adult content, which may seem like a good idea, but that meant anything considered not safe for work on Reddit was also now blocked unless you could prove your identity. So that means a lot of LGBT subreddits and things like that were completely blocked. So yeah, again, potentially controversial. You could see that as a good or a bad thing. But yeah, many of these platforms previously allowed hobbyists and researchers to scrape data for free if they wanted to figure out how to make some of these apps, or if they wanted to do research or just answer questions from curiosity. That was all quite easy to do with Reddit until about a month ago. So yeah, you should always think in this regard, there will be scandals, there will be controversies. So the availability of a past set of data is not a guarantee that you could get that last year of data tomorrow, for example. And whatever project you start now might not even be reproducible in a couple of years' time, because these big organizations can just change their mind on the way that people access data. So on Twitter, for example, any data collected after the 29th of September 2023 can no longer be shared outside of your research group. You could only share tweet IDs that identify those. So that would mean if somebody reproduced your study, they would also need that $50,000 budget from before just to reproduce your work with the same tweets. So again, as I said, they've kind of killed research that's based on Twitter legally. So we've talked about social media data. Now let's cover how users can collect this data and sort of how we got to the world we're in now, where we have to ask for API access from these big platforms. So at the start of the internet, if you found a data source you're interested in, say a local blog that just listed cars that were for sale in your area, if you're a competitor in that area, you might want to track all the prices of those cars. You might just be interested in the price of cars over time, and this is the best source you found. And the way you could do this back then is you just scroll through every page on that website, maybe 20 pages. You'd copy and paste all the fields, and you'd move them over to a spreadsheet or a notebook, or you'd write them down on paper. And if you really valued this, it was really common. I know it was when I was a student that people would pay you, I don't know, £50 to go scrape these big websites for them because it wasn't worth their time. And even back 10, 20 years ago, there were really good web scraping softwares that, as long as the website style was consistent, you could kind of automate this process. And at the time, this wasn't really explicitly illegal because it's kind of new. And also there's not much difference between the way we consume websites versus the way we scrape websites. Like we're just copy and pasting individual things from the website. So it's been a moral gray area for a long time, but that's also changing. And eventually the way those websites worked became a lot more complicated. So where the data about products may have just been manually written as individual lines of text in a HTML file, we gradually moved over to more complicated systems. So databases became more prevalent, with information about products stored separate to the website itself. And a website directly accessing this database could cause a really common security issue where users could figure out how that database was being accessed and potentially make changes to the website or send custom requests to a website or even delete all of the data on a database. So to protect against this, we started this pattern where we put what's called an API in the middle between that website and the database. And in that middle layer, we could add extra bits of logic to make sure that the requests coming from the website to the data sources weren't doing anything that we didn't want them to do. Now, this middle layer is very generically called an API or an application plugin interface. Hopefully, that's the scariest word we say today. It's a really technical term, but basically, what that means is it's something that lets you request data or information from another source, normally wrapped up in a way that's a bit easier to use, and we don't have to care about the underlying logic of how that happens. Some APIs were designed well enough that users could just choose to use the APIs instead of the website. You can kind of think of RSS feeds are kind of like this, like it's a more direct way to get data without having to look through a strange UI that you can't control. If you wanted that list of cars, for example, you could get it in a form that you could just paste straight into a spreadsheet, or you might even be able to download it as a spreadsheet directly from the database. In response to this, the API layer began to gain really common features to protect against, but also to enable large-scale web scraping. Some companies wanted this behavior. Um, you might, for example, want your website to have all of its pages crawled by Google. You might want all of the product information to be exposed so that it can show up in those, those product bubbles that Google has now. And now with like AI embeddings can be sort of listed directly in the website code as well. But you might not want competitors to be able to do that as well. So it sort of became this game of choosing who was and wasn't allowed to scrape data from your website. And the cost of those scrapes was relatively small, but sometimes a malicious or greedy scraper could cause problems for these small websites where they might be expecting, 100 users in a minute. If one user tries to scrape 200 pages on the website in that minute, they've tripled the amount of data that needs to be sent. That could crash the website, that could slow down the website for all the other users for the next minute. And basically, websites countered this by forcing users to create accounts and making that a limitation of API use. So sometimes you can't see a website unless you're already logged in, like Twitter does now. Um, and then on top of that, most APIs have something called rate limiting, which means you can only request a certain amount of data over a certain period of time. So you might see that if you refresh a page 100 times in like a minute, you might reach a point where you start getting security checked by Google. You might reach a point where the website doesn't let you load without doing a captcha or something like that. And at the time, some businesses didn't really mind this data use. They realized that users would actually be willing to pay for this data. You could think of hotel aggregator sites or car sales websites that automatically scrape hundreds of other websites to a point that sort of everyone in that process is making a little bit more money. People are kind of happy with that. And in some cases, people actually pay for access to that data or for faster access to that data. Um, and on top of that, in some cases, they would use those APIs to make additional products. So as I said, they would make aggregators, but also some people would just make fun things as like hobbyists as well. And then some businesses would donate their API access to those hobbyists. So maybe it's free if you're a student, maybe it's free if you're a researcher, or if you can sort of just claim you're a hobbyist and you're not going to make any money off this API access. And you were basically just given free access to Facebook API, Twitter API, Instagram API, all the really popular social medias and more. But some users of this data went a little bit too far. As I said, Cambridge Analytica used the Facebook API to allegedly manipulate elections. I'm not going to choose a side on that one. But yeah, so in some cases, basically pressure came in that forced these big businesses to reduce that API access. In many cases, in the name of privacy, but sometimes to save money. Um, but yeah, the privacy was always a big one for social media data. You can kind of identify a user from one post in many cases. If you had 10 posts, you can predict their voting patterns, their gender, all sorts of strange stuff. And that's kind of the stage we're in now. We're seeing this. Every single social media is sort of slowly locking down their API access. It's getting harder each year. You're required to prove your identity when you get that API key, which you didn't have to do. You might have to have a website, a privacy policy, a page on your university website, or an official university email address, for example. So what do we have to do now? How do we legally access a data source like Reddit? So I briefly mentioned this before, and apologies, this API bit is really the most technical part of what we do, but it's kind of the blocker for most research projects. So that's why I'm sort of very explicitly covering it so that when I introduce the API keys later, you sort of know what I'm talking about. So the summary at the top level is this. You ask for data. You don't really care how you get that data or what form it takes. And you just use a common language between us as users and the internet. And that is normally called a HTTP request. And this is how the entire internet works. Every time you send a login request to something, you load an image on the internet, you upload a file, all of those things are generally handled with simple HTTP requests. And as a little metaphor, you could think of it this way. So the website is the part of the business that you interact with. So imagine it's like a restaurant. You sit in the front, it's really nice, everything is made easy for you. Um, then the waiter is effectively your API. They have a little bit of context about the business, they're your connection to the kitchen. You don't care what's going on in the kitchen, you're just here to enjoy a nice meal of data. Um, you aren't allowed back in the kitchen, technically. The waiter will sort of be your communication level to the kitchen. They'll fill up your water, they'll give you a menu, they'll give you any special deals. And then the kitchen is the database. It could be clean, it could be a mess. That's not your problem. You're just here to enjoy that nice meal of cleanly prepared data. So without that waiter, you probably wouldn't have access to the kitchen. But if you tried to, maybe you could walk in there, you'd be confused by what you saw. And Reddit has a waiter or an API, and that's what we'll be working with today. So how do we get access to this API? So most platforms have what's called a developer page or a developer portal or an API access page or something like that. So if you Google how to access Reddit API or Reddit developer portal, that's probably the entry point to what you want to see here. Jill, I don't know if you already sent the links from before, but if you could send the first link that's links to the Reddit one now, I think that's it. So yeah, this changes quite a lot, and there's a lot of out of date information on these services because they tend to be quite like charitable and shut down very suddenly. So it can be quite tricky to find them. So I found the Reddit one and confirmed that it's working as of yesterday. You will probably need something that proves your status as researchers. So in some cases, just having an email like at manchester.ac.uk will be enough. But if you can find anything like your page, I don't know what they're called now, like a university Facebook, like a page on the official website that shows like a staff directory that shows you work there, that would be very helpful. Um, Clear project briefs and clear definitions of what you want to do with the data, what data you want to get, and why. Try not to sound like too exploratory, basically, like be very intentioned and very clear about what you want to do. Um, it used to be, I've crossed it out until about 3 weeks ago. The big advantage, you didn't need any of that for Reddit. You could get access for research at any point. But sadly, as of 3 weeks ago, they've added this requirement that you have to sign up for it in advance, which means that if you don't already have an API key now, you won't be able to get one during this talk. But again, I've confirmed it, and it takes them about 24 hours to approve or reject a request. So you don't need to wait months like you do with some social medias. Another technical comment here after we go through this process, if you successfully get access to the API, you will be given what's called an API key that's made of two different parts, a public value and a secret value. And these will just be strings of random letters and numbers, basically. So this is how the API knows who you are and how they authenticate you. And you should sort of see the first value as like a username. You might, you could probably share it within your research group, but there wouldn't really be a reason to do so. The second one is effectively a password. So if you're using your personal Reddit account, for example, and you share this pair of values with somebody else in your office, they will be able to log into your account, delete all of your messages, read your private messages, post on your behalf, all sorts of things. So you should be, if you're going to do this, make a new Reddit account for your research group or something like that. Don't use a personal one if you can help it. But if you do, just be very careful with these random numbers they give you. Don't show them if you're delivering training or in a Zoom call or anything like that, which I won't be doing because I don't have an API key anymore. um, right. So collecting social media legally and ethically is also not straightforward anymore. It was morally great to start with, but yeah, it's a bit more defined now. So that's why the demos I'm showing today, they can't actually collect any real data because you as the viewers are all not in my research group. And also this will be on YouTube later. So I would be sort of breaching the ethics of sharing data as an academic. And also I would be in breach of the terms of service for Reddit if I did that. So the data set used in the later demos here could be collected with the Jupyter notebook I'm about to show you with correct API keys. So if you've already got them, you're welcome to use them. Just don't share any of the data in the chat or anything like that. But yeah, I can't collect, distribute, or analyze any real data in this webinar. I'm really sorry. Um, yeah, so I've created a synthetic version that is very obviously labeled as fake, doesn't really contain anything useful, and has some like synthetically generated comments about tea and coffee, and has some sort of common properties with normal Reddit data. Um, so yeah, I'll be quite explicit over these next few slides about how you can use this Reddit data in academia, basically. So you can publish the results of your research as long as you exclude any of the data you scrape from Reddit or any derivative products based on that. So if you trained a model using that Reddit data, you're not allowed to share that technically. You have to credit Reddit in whatever research you release or whatever product you make, and you must anonymize any information in those published results, which is a tricky thing to define as well. For other social media data, this isn't necessarily the same. You have to check the terms. I can't advise on that. It changes all the time as well, so you've just got to be up to date with it. I will say though, Reddit is quite friendly in this regard. Being able to get an API key in one day is like unprecedented over the last 10 years. So this is still my recommendation, but it is getting harder every day. So there's two problems with social media data use. The first is its legality. In the UK and EU, as I assume most of the viewers are now based, data protection laws regulate the storage, processing, and sharing of any personal data. Some comments or information about comments could very easily be considered personal data, especially if they identify an individual. My username on Reddit, as a very easy example, could just be Joseph Allen, my full name. And my comment might talk about me giving this webinar or working at the University of Manchester, and that would make it really easy to identify me just from a single comment or even from my username. Legally speaking, Reddit's terms allow scraping for research use, so we're fine there. Most websites aren't explicit on that, but again, you can't publish or share any of that data. Copyright is also implied for individual comments. And lastly, these laws change all the time, depending on your country. And again, I'm assuming most viewers here are based in the UK right now, but if you've seen this on YouTube or something, those restrictions might be different for you. And sadly, you're going to have to unpack that or ask your university for advice. Now, the other side, that's legality. The other side is ethics. Even if you've complied legally, you still may not be allowed to use Reddit data for your research project. The common argument here, I mean, we're going to argue about ethics of Reddit data use very briefly, but the very common argument, public posts are fair game. My parents certainly said to me, what you publish on the internet is there forever and you should treat it as such. But I have definitely not used the internet in that regard. And I'm hopefully quite tech savvy as I'm giving this webinar. But yeah, we can't really trust that. You'd think that most users basically assume some sort of anonymity, but that is also not the case. There's a study shown in this blog here that shows that 55% of users on social media social media data don't know how to make their social media data unavailable to scrapers and researchers, or they claim that they've never had the time to do so. So that means that the majority of people who have their data out there don't actually want it out there. So that's not really a safe assumption we can make, sadly. And then paradoxically, maybe an alternative to that would be seeking consent from individual users. But in many cases, just the process of seeking that consent is actually quite uncomfortable. If someone messaged you on a social media platform and told you that they had scraped your data to see your views on coffee and tea, and whether that was a university or a company, I think that would make quite a lot of people uncomfortable. And then seeking consent from thousands of users on social media is just a very unrealistic thing to start off. You know, the benefit is the volume. So if we can do something that lets us work with the volume without creating a huge amount of work for ourselves, that's a big benefit. And obviously, on top of that, there's a big bias. If we only get people on social media that are happy with their data being shared, what they share is probably more likely to conform with, you know, with what we're expecting to see. Risk of re-identification is high in the comments and really difficult to automate the removal of. We can't just remove every time I mention my name or my age or what city I live in. So we kind of have to go fully synthetic if we wanted to share data like this. And then on top of that, each university has a different ethics board. If you want to access Reddit data ethically, it might take you months to get that permission from your ethics board. Only a day from Reddit, but from your research institute, that's likely to take longer. So you should definitely reach out promptly if this is something you think you want to explore. So you may be asking, after all of that, how is it possible to make this work reproducible? You explicitly can't share usernames, dates, or full comments, as that will lead to that instant re-identification of a user or often the individual themselves. So at a first tier, what you can do is share query parameters, right? So not the data, but if I say I've scraped all comments on the r/Manchester subreddit from 2020 to 2022, and I scraped them today on the 10th of December, 2025. That's a pretty good start point. That gives those users the ability to delete their comments and affect future research. So the data they get in the future will be slightly different. But that kind of gives our commenters like the ability to opt out of future research if they become clued up on this kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, again, seek permission from Reddit as soon as possible. They're quite explicit about what you can and can't do, but they also are quite respondent at the moment, which is quite strange. Um, what you can do with that permission is you can store the IDs of individual comments. So that means you get a one-to-one mapping that you can share with people. And this means you could maintain a big list of a million IDs that identify individual comments. And another researcher is allowed to request those IDs from you to reproduce your work, and then they can rehydrate it with their own API. Although technically you could just copy and paste those into the browser and you would see the original comment. But it's very easy to replicate sort of an analyzed, complicated data set from just those IDs. So now I'm going to quickly show you how to set up an account and get API keys. Am I going to do that? I'll try and show you I'll have to find the Reddit link real quick. And then I will show a scraping demo. But again, I'm not going to complete any of these things. I'm just showing you what the process is like. So this is brand new. This has only been here for about 3 weeks. Before this, you didn't have to do any of this stuff, but the link I've sent in the Zoom chats will fill in this for API access requests, so you don't need to do that. Email address, put something academic if you've got it. If you've got your university email, use that. Describe your role. You are all researchers, hopefully, but again, if you're watching it on YouTube, you might just be interested. Oh, and when you pick research, it'll fill in the rest. So put in your Reddit account username, your associated educational institution, the location of that educational institution, and then research purpose. This is the only bit where you can put whatever you want. So in here, what I would suggest is like add anything that proves your project in any standing. If you've got a website that links to your project or proves that you work at the university, I would put that in here as like evidence of who you are, and try and be quite verbose here because this is a new process and I'm not sure what is required to get approval or rejection, basically. But they're quite good at responding. But yeah, and then I don't think anyone needs direct database access. You should just be able to get stuff. And then again, a big concern is that like, what are you going to do with the data after the project? So you can sort of make that seem quite short term. And again, list those details in the research process, try and make it really easy for them. And if you have anything else, an ID or something, you can put it here and submit it. That will send an email to you letting you know that you've submitted this. And again, this takes about 24 hours for them to reply. I tested it yesterday and I got the message this morning. So they are being quite quick with it at the moment. But if I don't know how many people are in here now, 100 of you, if you all apply at once, that might be a lot for them. But get in early before everyone watches this video and figures out what a cool data source Reddit is. Right, so now I'll do a little scraping demo. So there should have been sent before a binder link to this. You can also find it on the UK Data Service GitHub, but that binder link will open this up for you. It has Python installed. It has all the packages installed that you need. So you shouldn't need to do any setup beyond running each of these cells once, basically. And you can do that if you go in here and do run all cells. But I'll walk you through it first. And again, this is recorded. So if it's too fast, You can go back and watch it. You can slow it down if I talk too fast, which I have a sense I'm doing. So once you've got that API key, it'll reveal it as a client ID and a client secret. So this is what I talked about earlier. This is your username, the client ID, and this is a client secret. This is your password. So again, don't share this one if you care about the account at all. And then if you've never used Jupyter before, if you press Control and Enter in here, that little box on the side will update to a number, and that means you've successfully run that cell. So when you do that run all, it will run all the cells in sequence, but you do need to go in here and update these two API keys. And then I put a lot of text so you can read that outside of this. That's just in case I'm not here to walk you through it. So we install Python, we install pip, and then we're installing a package called pro, or I think it's Python Reddit something wrapper or something like that. If those aren't installed, you can uncomment these lines and install them like this, and then Control Enter, but they should be installed. And especially on your binder link, they should be installed. So if at this stage you see anything other than some numbers, you need to go back and uncomment these and run those. So this just confirms I've got Pro version 7. So when I read the docs, I can compare it to that, but that should be all you need to see if you're not too technical. Then all our other packages, Pandas lets us sort of manipulate and analyze tables of data or CSV files. OpenPixel, OpenPyXL, that sounds right, lets you mess around with Excel sheets. And so I'm going to be importing and exporting stuff to Excel. So that's a useful one to have. And then DateTime will just let us process those timestamps into something that's a bit more readable. This link is out of date, but I've just shown you and shared the link on how you do that. You've got those values. And so when you get to this point, we're pretty much done. You can now get all of the comments from a single Reddit post. Again, I can't go to a Reddit post and show you how I would do that. But this is where you need to do that. So it might be helpful if you do have the API keys ready now, you can go find a quick post to put here while I just explain this next bit. So this sets up your Reddit scraper. It's just setting the client ID to the variable we defined at the top of the file, just to make it easier for you guys. Client secret, also from the top of the file, and then a user agent. This is a piece of text that we send to Reddit when we hit this API that describes who we are, what our request is doing. I would hope now that they've locked this down, this is less important, but basically you need to have a little description of what it is. This worked for me, but if you put nothing, it might reject. And then I put my username. They have a little bit of detail on how to do this, but again, this worked for me, so it should be enough for you, especially in this exploratory stage. I won't run it because it won't work for me. Well, it will work actually, but I won't actually be hitting any real data. So I've pulled this all out so you can just paste the URL from an individual post here, and then when you run this one, it will get all of those comments and move it into a table and then write it to a CSV. So it's using that Python scraper there. It's iterating through every comment. And then it's doing what I described before as flattening. So sort of the structure of Reddit data is there's a comment, and then there's a comment underneath it, and a comment underneath it, and they're all sort of nested. This will just flatten them down so they're all in one column, and the links between them it's kind of lost, but it's definitely more interesting to have them nested, but it creates a really complicated structure. And I think, I assume most of you are beginners in this, so we'll just do something a little bit more simple. And then it should print out 5 comments. So you should get confirmation when you run that by pressing Control Enter that you've got real comments. Then I'll read it into a Python Pandas data frame, write it to a CSV if you run this one, or write it to an Excel spreadsheet if you run this one. So that gets all your comments into Excel without having to copy and paste everything. Then I have another example that will get all comments from multiple posts. So again, you can replace these 3 URLs with different URLs for different posts that you're interested in. So you might be looking at favorite drinks in different countries. So maybe one will be a post about tea and coffee in England, one will be in Kenya, one will be in Australia. And then you'll keep that title. So the post title is now put into the data you collect. And you can sort of compare those groups differently if you'd like to. And then again, it will log that out, log out the first five comments, and you can just check if it's working there. And then same some helpers for you, store it as data, check the data, write it to a CSV or write it to an Excel spreadsheet, your choice. And then the one that I found most useful, just grabbing all of the comments from an entire subreddit, I found this really interesting to do. Um, it limits using the same filters that Reddit kind of has anyway. So you can sort by best of all time or most controversial. You can get thousands of posts. You can probably get all of them for a smaller subreddit quite easily. But this is where you can sort of craft something if you wanted to compare all of like the United Kingdom subreddit to the America subreddit. It would be a huge volume of data, and I'm sure the API will struggle at some point. But I'm hoping for most of you, if you had like 10,000 comments, that would be really exciting for you. And this is a pretty easy way to do that. Um, all you have to do is put the subreddit name up here as well, and it'll my little snippet will sort that out for you. And then again, it'll write that to a CSV or an Excel spreadsheet. I've got the structure of that CSV here. So we've got a URL. Again, this is not real data. So I've written explicitly fake at the start of every one of these columns. All the authors are completely fake. All of the comments are completely generated by me. The scores are random numbers. Nothing here is real. But this is the structure you will see. So there'll be the URL that links back to the original post. There'll be a post ID. So if you went to like reddit.com/this ID, it would route you directly to that real post. Then I've got the post title. So I can do analysis on different titles, maybe in different subreddits. Then I've got the authors, so I can compare individual authors. You'll find on Reddit that some users have commented like 10 times a day for the last 10 days. So your study could directly target an individual person, though I'm not sure I would recommend that from the ethical side, but sometimes there's very interesting people on there. Then the score, this is, you might not all be familiar with Reddit, but basically every comment on Reddit gets upvoted or downvoted, and this becomes a score. So a positive score will just generally have a lot of upvotes versus downvotes. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but you can generally see it as the bigger this number is, the more popular the content is. But then you have weird definitions of like what is a controversial comment. It's a lot more complicated than that. It's not one for one. It's kind of logarithmic, something like that. It like flattens out. Then we have the timestamp it was created, if you just wanted to confirm you've got the right days. And then we have the body. This is the actual text itself. You can see in there are some deleted comments. That's a structure unique to Reddit. So there are gotchas with these different social media sources. And somewhere in here, there are also other bots that talk. So bots will normally say the same things, but we'll go through that in a little bit. So now I'm going to introduce just some of the techniques we're going to use on that fake data set I just showed you. I assume you can see. One sec. Let me get my presenter view back up. Let me know if you can't see the slides, but that should be okay. So now we have some data. We need to pick something to do with it. And I always like to use sentiment analysis. I think that's a really great entry-level method that can get you stuck into text processing. That's quite easy to understand once you do it, and actually quite easy to implement once you understand it as well. So it's usually easy for us as humans to take a look at a sentence like this and determine whether it's positive or negative, and which topics or which words have that sentiment associated with them. So if you look at this sentence here, I really like the taste of coffee. It makes me happy. Do you see that as a positive or negative sentence? And then ask yourself, how do you know? What is it? Let me have some water, sorry. Right. So how do you know whether it's positive or negative? And what's the topic of the sentence? For me, I can read that, and I maybe I've done too much sentiment analysis, but I see words that imply a very clear sentiment to me. I see like, I see happy. I can kind of assume very quickly that the sentence is going to be positive. I can see a word like really, which kind of adds strength to the word that comes behind it, but doesn't necessarily imply it's positive or negative. And then I can also see most words here, just for sentiment, they're not really adding anything. I, the, it, makes, me, probably are the words that like aren't adding anything to that sentence. And then for the subject, you could argue that's coffee. You could argue that is the taste of coffee itself. But most words in there aren't really adding to the kind of analysis that I'm trying to do here. So same for these sentences. How do you know if they're positive or negative? I really like coffee. I love coffee. I hate coffee. Very easy examples for sentiment analysis, I'd hope. The sentiment in these is just determined by a single word in these sentences that imply sentiment, like, love, hate. So if we break this down a little bit, we can start to build up what's called a lexicon. It's kind of an older form of text processing. Now we have AI and LLMs, but this is a good way to sort of build up to that kind of knowledge. A lexicon is effectively a collection of words or tokens and their associated meaning or scores. And in this case, because we're building a sentiment lexicon, that associated score will be the sentiment of positivity or negativity. So if we go through this sentence, we have the first word, I, doesn't imply any sentiment. It just gives context that this is my opinion, which we might not care about in our study. Really is a really complicated thing for sentiment analysis, right? Because it's effectively adding strength to that second word, but on its own really doesn't imply positivity or negativity. Between someone saying, I like coffee and I really like coffee obviously has stronger sentiment, but that's quite difficult to understand at like this word by word level. So we finally hit our first word with sentiment, like. So I'm going to mark this with a +1 sentiment score. So every time we find a word like, happy, good, we're going to add +1 to our total sentiment score for this sentence. Then coffee, our topic, adds no score. It's neutral. Well, it's arguably neutral in my lexicon. So for this sentence, we could just very lazily describe this entire sentence of having a +1 sentiment score. And hence, on this scale of -1 to +1, the more positive that score is, the more positive the sentiments. And the more negative that score is, the more negative the sentence is. So negative example, very straightforward, exactly the same. I and coffee have no sentiment. Hate is negative, so let's give it a -1 sentiment score. And now our entire sentence has a total sentiment of -1 and is inherently negative because we've decided from our negative dictionary that this is a negative sentence. Next, we have the issue of weighting. So not all words have the same sentiment, right? Like and love are different strengths of the same feeling. That was a weird sentence to say. Hate and dislike have the same problem or quality. So yeah, not every positive word is equal, is all I'm trying to say here. So we have a choice to make now. Do we say like and love are both +1 because they're both positive? Or do we say that love is worth more than like in terms of sentimentality? And that's what I'm going to do for this example. So I'm saying love has a +2 sentiment score, and hence I love coffee is more positive than I like coffee. But then we have some problems. What happens when there's more than one word implying that sentiment? We could end up with something neutral that very clearly has two different sentiments in it. So I love coffee, but I hate that I drink it every day. That sentence has a +2 score from love, a -1 score from hate. Um, the current scoring says 1, and this is kind of a problem, right? The whole sentence is positive, but actually, I love coffee is positive about coffee. I hate drinking it every day is negative about the need to have that coffee every day. So we this very simple model falls on problems quite quickly, basically. And then we have that issue in a longer message. There's just more possibility for sentimental words to occur. So should this mean that if I write a big essay on how much I love coffee, should that have 1,000 points of positive sentimentality? Is it 1,000 times stronger than someone who just says I love coffee? And you could argue it does, right? Like if I'm going on the internet and boasting about how much I love coffee, then maybe I do like coffee more than someone who just says they love it. And then again, it's the internet. We have problems like sarcasm. The quality of our lexicon can't really catch these sarcastic issues, right? We have to try and figure those out ourselves. And on the internet, that's such a frequent thing. So you just have to be careful with what you're grabbing, basically. And really, arguably, a solution to this is like using LLMs to calculate the sentiment score is not a terrible idea. But you have to know what you're getting into. So we could have examples like, I love to drink coffee. It tastes like dirt, but that's a joke on the internet. The sentence could be negative in meaning, but from our lexicon, we would describe that as positive because it has the word love, which just isn't the way we communicate in the real world, but it is the way we communicate over text. I hate coffee. I drink it every day is like, you're like, ah, it's too complicated for me to explain right now. So that's the context for our project today. But before we do that, before we get to sentiment analysis, we're going to do a little bit of text processing. Social media data adds a lot of noise, a lot of repetition, and this is something that we can't really skip if we want to get something good out the end of our analysis, which again, I'll show in the demo very soon. So this diagram gives like the high level steps of tidying up text for analysis. We're going to do a simpler version of this with only a few of these steps, but this blog post on DataCamp is really good. It'll be linked in the sources at the end. If you really like what we're doing now, there are some really cool things you can add on top of that that this blog post covers really nicely. So first step is just assessing, does the platform where we're studying add any noise? So in Reddit's case, it does certain things. In Twitter's case, they do certain things. So you might expect just simple free text comments. But on Twitter, for example, if you use a hashtag or if the tweet itself is a retweet, they add like little helper codes like RT for retweet into the body of the comment itself. So that would become your most common word because that's used in like 40% of all tweets. And that doesn't really help your analysis. That doesn't, that's not a good answer to a hypothesis, right? To just say the most common word on Twitter is retweet. It's something that we should probably remove before we do analysis. On Reddit, we have a similar problem. The majority of posts are made by something called auto moderator, which is like a common shared bot between large subreddits. And normally, the first comment on every post is the auto moderator giving a warning to users in that subreddit or copying the paste of the text so the user can't delete the text or edit the text. So you tend to get like very common robot phrases at the top, like I am auto moderator, welcome to the United Kingdom subreddit or something like that. So every one of the words that that auto moderator uses would become one of your most popular words. So it's important that you remove these. Then we have normalization. In most methods, the word coffee with a capital C and coffee in lowercase would be considered different words because they just have different mathematical values when we write them out. Splitting the count of those in every time coffee is spelled differently by either capitalization or even typos, um, that inconsistency can basically reduce your important words down and give more weight to words that occur less frequently, basically. So you can go as complicated as you like here. You can add spell check to all of these comments. A very simple approach is just lowercase everything, remove all grammar, and that will sort of, all punctuation, sorry. And that will sort of at least flatten your largest problem of like words that appear at the start of a sentence versus the middle of sentences. Then we have stop words. So most words used in sentences, that the theory was that these stop words don't actually add anything to the meaning or the sentiment of sentences in most cases, and they can kind of confuse visualizations and models. And these contextless words are things like and, therefore, so, after. They definitely have very interesting grammatical definitions. The theory is they don't really affect the sort of subject and sentiment of sentences. For example, I could say all of this stuff about coffee, but actually, if we just reduced it down to I like coffee and we learned that this user likes coffee, that's quite an interesting finding to be able to get from complicated data. Then, more advanced but possible, we have stemming. So drinking and drink share what's called a word stem. So drinking is a really important topic if we're talking about tea and coffee. So we could merge all the variations in the comments of drinking, drinking with a capital D, drink, drank, drunk, down to a single word. And so now our comments wouldn't really make sense, but all of the times people talk about drinking would be reduced to a single instance, and that can be quite useful as well. I used that before when I was analyzing like COVID symptoms on Twitter. And so if you take all of the words like sneeze, sneezing, coughing, cough, coughed, and reduce them, they kind of like bubble up through all the analysis you do, and it's quite easy to find like related symptoms and verbs and things like that. And as I mentioned a little bit before, but we've mostly been talking about this like lexicon-based approach that's very manual. But these days you can kind of do a lot of this stuff with LLMs, or large API providers like Amazon will have their own sentiment analyzer API that you can use. So they're sort of, this level of thinking about it is gradually getting abstracted away from us. But I think once you understand it from these basics, those bigger tools are quite useful, basically. Now, we've done the scraping before, um, and as I said, we've got a fake data set that we're going to be looking at here in Python. I'll just read the reminder because I've been explicitly told to. Reminder, having the right to use data for research does not imply any right to share, distribute it, or any derivatives of it. Read the terms and conditions. I'm using fake data now. Don't share your data. So I'm going to do some analysis in Python. Yeah, okay. So same data from before, and there should be a second binder link that was sent in the chat before. Again, it's in the GitHub if you can't find it in the README at the bottom, and maybe someone can reshare it again. That binder might take a few minutes to load, so I'll try and talk slowly. You can ignore this stuff at the top. That's just for me. And again, if you click in a cell and press Control Enter, that will run it. That's okay. If you want, you can pre-run the entire thing. If you do run all cells, and just let that process while we talk through it. But it's best to go through it one by one. Right. So first thing we always do is import packages we need because we're going to be playing around with a lot of data and we're using Python. The standard here is using pandas and NumPy and sort of deal with mathematical information and create nice tables and charts and things like that. I've added these two other packages. Run the first one with Control and Enter. Then I've got some nicer visualization libraries here that, again, if you want to use them, you have to remove this comment and install them. But if you're using the binder, you shouldn't need to install anything. So Control Enter in the next cell. If that doesn't error, then you've already got Matplotlib and Seaborn installed. Cool. And then I've set a really cool UK data service color palette here. So all of our plots will have the UK data service colors. And then finally, we can read in our data. So exactly the same CSV from over here. You can see that the comment I can't choose will be the final comment on the right here. I can't choose. But the data is exactly the same. It's just read into this nice visual, but you can explore it in here as well if you like. And the reason we do this is because everything else we're going to do is going to use this data frame here instead of the actual CSV file. So this will just log out those comments so we can just read them a little bit easier. So first comment, I can't function without coffee since I quit soda. Instant coffee is a crime. Smug face or sad face? I'm not sure what that is. An interesting point, though, you can add emojis to your lexicon, right? A happy face emoji could probably be considered positive sentiment. Sad face emoji could be considered negative. They are, in text processing, valid words or valid tokens. Espresso is life, especially when it's raining. Tea drinkers are just built different. You can see I didn't particularly generate realistic comments here, but there are comments that you can use, and I'm hoping some of you are using some real data instead and having a more fun time than I am. I always recommend running data.info or on your data frame, the info function. This will just sort of confirm what you've got. It'll tell you how many rows you've got. It'll describe those columns and what type they are. They're almost all objects, but it does confirm that the score is a number. This might give you a clue that something's going wrong. For example, if this wasn't a number, maybe that would mean that score in some cases is empty or deleted or something. That's normally like a red flag that you need to check sort of the quality of data first. Then you can use describe, and that will only analyze like the mathematical fields, which in this case is only the score. But that just gives you like a very instant view of your data. Okay, we've got 750 comments. The average comment has almost 250 upvotes, though it's not real data. The lowest comment has one, so that kind of implies like none of our comments are extremely negative or controversial because it would probably have a negative score there. And then we can see the most positive or most upvoted comment has almost 500 views. So this would be a good place to sort of see what's the most negative or what's the like most controversial comment, and then compare it to like the most positive comment. And if you're looking at, again, a subreddit like the United Kingdom subreddit, you might sort of see very political issues represented in those two, or very strong opinions, and it can be quite a good sort of like the two boundaries of what you're looking at, sort of try and come up with a question, which is what we're normally trying to do when we do this kind of exploratory analysis. Next, we get the number of comments on each post. So this will just count the number of comments associated with each of these fake post titles. If you're using real data, you don't need any of these fake things. So you would change that. Sorry, you would change that read CSV to point to your data, which you won't be able to do on the binder, but you'll have to download the repo. And then you just remove this fake prepend from all of this, and it will work with your CSV. Then we can see the most common authors. So we can see almost every user in this data set has only left one comment, with the exception of this user who's left two. So that can be useful because normally you'll see most users will only leave one comment, but you'll probably have a lot of like super users at the top that leave like hundreds of comments on a very niche subreddit. But as I said, the most common user is auto moderator, which has left four comments. So everything auto moderator says, if it's repeating itself, will become our most popular words and ruin any visualizations or anything like that. So now from those scores, we can get the highest upvoted score. Again, these are completely random, so it doesn't correlate with anything. But here we might expect to see a really positive and glowing message on Reddit that people really resonate with. Same, we can sort by the lowest five. When I gave the warning at the start, this would probably be where we're seeing those racist and sexist comments, but luckily it's still just about coffee and tea. So if anything, this talk has been improved by the lack of real users. So it's it's all right, but there's some stuff we need to tidy up, like the auto moderator. So first thing I can do is I can get a table of all the auto moderator comments, and I can see that they've all left the same comment. Thanks, OP, original poster, for your submission. So these are probably going to be our most popular words because there's four instances of them, or they're going to bubble up a little bit higher than they should, basically. And this has only got like four different posts, but if you're scraping those entire subreddits and you get 10,000 posts, you'll get 10,000 instances of this auto moderator at least. You might get some for like banned users and other things. So this line will remove that auto moderator. So nothing will show up here now. So now there's no auto moderator in our data set. And I also showed before there were some deleted lines. And the way that Pro deals with this is it just writes the word deleted, actually the way Reddit does. Instead of removing the comment entirely because someone could reply to the comment, they replace the text with the text deleted in square brackets. So that again will become one of your really popular words because loads of people are deleting their stuff all the time. So one way to deal with actually both of these at once is you could delete any duplicated message. So that would get rid of the deleted message, any repetitive bot messages, and there's not just auto moderator, there are countless bots that might say, fix people's grammar and do all sorts of stuff. But also when you do this deletion, say if there was like some sort of protest going on, and everyone was like commenting black squares or something, you might delete something that's actually like quite an interesting cultural moment on Reddit. So, be careful and like have a good explore of your data set before you just drop duplicates like this. But I would suggest you go through and you know exactly what you're deleting. Then we can do the value counts of all those comments, and that will basically just show I have no duplicate comments. So I'm just showing that dropping of duplicated comments has worked. Next, we're on sentiment analysis. So this might take a little bit of time to download the first time you run it, but I should already have it. So what we're doing here is instead of building our own lexicon from words and defining, okay, this word is, like and love, a positive, worth, whatever, we can actually use other people's pre-made lexicons, and there are benefits to using different ones, but this is a really common one, the Veda lexicon from NLTK. That also comes with a sentiment analyzer, so we don't have to write that code ourselves, even though we could. We can just create a new sentiment analyzer using that. And then I've written a little function here that will just get what's called a compound sentiment. So you can get separately the positive amount, the negative amount, but this will get that -1 for negative to +1 for positive. So now I can call that on strings. So I can say get sentiment of I love tea, and we get a score of 0.6369. It's a lot more specific than the examples I was giving. That sort of suggests that love has a sentiment of 0.64 in this data set, or this lexicon, sorry. Hate is -0.75719. So that interestingly suggests that hate is less negative than love is positive in this lexicon. And then IMT has no sentiment at all, so it correctly gives a 0 sentiment score, a neutral score. So we can see that's kind of working there. just to break it down a bit, I've written another function here that just breaks a sentence down into words so we can see how those words get their individual sentiment. So we have I love tea, and we can see I, no sentiment, tea, no sentiment, but love has that exact same sentiment as the entire sentence did. So now we can apply it to some bigger sentences, and we can try and figure out, are they positive or negative, which is what we're going to be doing with all of the comments in our data set. So you've got here 0.45 basically. So it's less positive than just saying I love tea, even though it contains the entire phrase I love tea. So you might be thinking, why does that happen? So we can use our sentiment by word function, and we can see love 0.63. We can see boost 0.4, even more positivity. But we see that word anxious has negative sentiment associated with it. So it brings the score down a little bit. So this cell will just apply that to our entire data frame, all of our data at once, and add a sentiment column at the end. So from that, we can sort all of our comments and find the most positive and the most negative comments. So I can see I've got here, I love tea, it helps me focus. Chai lattes are perfection. That is actually probably the most positive comment I've read on tea and coffee since we started this. I can also find the lowest one. Espresso is life, especially when it's raining. Instant coffee is a crime. So it's a little bit positive, but maybe I would imagine life doesn't have sentiment associated with it, even though it's used here like a catch-all phrase for something amazing. It's like saying espressos are perfect, but I wouldn't be surprised if this lexicon didn't understand that. And then instant coffee is a crime. Maybe crime just has this amount of sentiment. Maybe it's extremely negative, and maybe that's offset. But yeah, comparing those, it's a little bit more positive at the top, a little bit. Actually, there's a lot of instant coffee as a crime listed at the end here. So maybe that is more negative than we think. Right. So they're detailed, but it's not great to just see a bunch of like four decimal place numbers representing sentiment. So we can begin to visualize that. And one thing I always like to do is just doing a really quick histogram just to see like what the distribution is of those sentiment scores. So just from this straight away, we've got a frequency on the left, number of comments that are in the buckets of these different sentiment scores, and then the sentiment from -1 up to +1. But you can see we have no sentences that were below -0.6, as we just saw with our lowest sentiment, and we have none that are over like 0.9 or something like that. We can see that the actual number of sentences that are under 0.0, the actual number of negative sentences, is quite low compared to the number of positive sentences. And we also see this big spike around neutral sentiment. So it's possible that, to me, this indicates here that maybe our lexicon isn't good enough for this data set. Maybe there's a lot of coffee and tea, very specific language that just isn't included, and maybe we should be writing our own, or we should be extending that lexicon with a couple of extra words. Then we've got these big spikes here. I'm not really sure what could be causing those, but it does seem like, our lexicon isn't really good enough, and we're not really seeing like a smooth curve here like I would expect to. Then I like to check the correlation. A really interesting question for Reddit is just, are the people who get lots of upvotes overly positive or overly negative? Like, is it cool to praise the topic of a subreddit while you're in the subreddit? Probably, but then also it's probably cool to be negative about something as well. So that can sort of give you a good hint. There's a slight positive correlation, but there's nothing in this data set to really suggest that, which makes sense because I randomly generated the scores and the comments. So there shouldn't really be anything there. Then I'm just downloading another package from NLTK because it has stop words in it, I think. So what I'm doing here is I'm slowly building up like a word and frequency list so we can make word clouds and we can do visualizations. With this, I can list our top words, now accounting frequency, and we sort of have a problem straight away. Our most common word from our analysis is a full stop, which makes sense because every sentence probably has a full stop. Some of those comments have multiple sentences as well. But we do have some good contenders there. We have the word coffee, we have the word tea. So at least our subjects are in there, but only 2 out of our top 10 words, I would say, are relevant to what we're trying to study, right? To the topics we're talking about here. I've also included a bar plot just so we can see those frequencies a bit more obviously. So yeah, all of our top words are literally just punctuation. It's not really useful and a pronoun. So my ideal here, like what we're looking for, I'd like to see coffee and tea up there. I'd like to see a clean graph. I'd like to see words like drinking or relaxing or caffeine or something like that, something that helps us make sense around coffee and tea. So first thing to do is remove these punctuations like full stop and comma. We don't need those in our graphs. We don't need those in any visualizations or word clouds we're doing, so we can get rid of them. And also we have something called stop words, which I'll get into in a second. So first, I'm just going to drop all of that. So this line here is going to remove anything that's not a letter or a number. We can check that again, and we can see now in this new list, we don't have a full stop at the top, which is great. So our most popular word now is I, which makes sense. We're asking for a lot of opinions, but now coffee is our second most popular word. Tea is our fifth most popular. And then we have that problem I talked about before. We have tea with a capital T. That's kind of confusing. Coffee with a capital C will have the same problem. But yeah, now we're getting there. Like 3 out of 10 words are kind of relevant to our problem space instead of two of them. And we've kind of got rid of these things that were just ruining the graph. Next, we have what's called stop words. So I mentioned what those were before, but one of the benefits of using NLTK is I can just list out the stop words. So looking at this, we can see what is it? Did, from, he, her, I. These are all words that are defined in this lexicon as just not being helpful. And with that, we can go through every comment and just remove those stop words as well. So this will remove alphanumeric characters and the stop words. And then we can log our new top 10. And we can see now we've got coffee, tea, coffee, day, though, taste, helps, better, work. So now I'd say maybe all of those, maybe not though, but 9 out of 10 of those feel kind of relevant to coffee and tea drinking at the moment. And we're wasting a bit. We can merge these two together. But we're getting a much more natural looking graph. All of our top 4 words are just coffee and tea, the actual topic that we've been searching around. So this makes a lot of sense. Then, yeah, I can really easily, we can just lowercase. So if we use this lowercase function, that will lowercase coffee and tea, and then we'll merge those two together as well. So I'm just going to list the top 20. So now we've got tea, coffee. So actually, there were more instances of tea, but they were represented by the lowercase t's instead of the uppercase t's. Then we've got day, tastes, help work, drink has finally showed up, smells, lazy Sunday morning. I like this one. They've got the exact same count, which means lazy Sunday morning probably always is said in a single sentence in sequence. Raining, cup, totally makes sense. I would expect to see cup and mug. So we've kind of reduced that all of those sentences from comments down to popular words that make sense to be seen with coffee or tea. And then I've got a little snippet here that will reduce those comments to only comments that contain a particular word. So something that I like to do here is instead of like looking for everything associated with tea and coffee isn't particularly interesting. But if we compared tea and coffee separately, maybe we would see different words in those top 10 words. We can make a different word cloud for tea and for coffee and see how they differ. But because this is like a random data set, that won't be particularly interesting because they're probably all the same. So if you change the taste in here, you can change that keyword for your data set. But this will find all of those frequent words that appear with the word taste. So now we have coffee is our top word. So I can imagine people saying like the taste of coffee is difficult to like or something like that. I love the taste of black coffee. Like black never showed up in our top 10, top 20 before. Acquired taste makes sense. We've got, I assume, every instance of taste in there, but these other words seem to occur with taste very frequently, basically more frequently than the word taste itself. We've got mentions of quitting soda again, but now you see we're getting down to like one or two instances of each word. So we're probably getting to like words that could be left by a single comment and aren't really interesting. So this little snippet will change that object from one that we can visualize nicely into one that the word cloud package likes to see. You can uncomment these if you need to install it, but again, if you're using Binder, you don't need to. Control Enter in here, we now have the word cloud package for Python. And this little snippet will take that frequencies object I just made for you, and it will plot it as a word cloud, making popular words show up bigger. So again, just a different visualization, but we see taste, black, and coffee, those popular words, they are the biggest words in this word cloud. So useful if you need to make a poster in a university, if you want to show off your work. This is I think it's fun. I think it's a fun way to see word frequency, basically. Um, but to me, this word cloud is like, it's interesting, but we could make some more stylized choices, basically, to make it represent tea and coffee a little bit better. So you can do what's called masking. So I've included some masks in the binder in this word cloud folder. So a mask has to be of like this structure. So white are areas that words can't be written, and black is areas words can be written. So when we apply this circle mask to here, we will get a circular or not get a circular word cloud. So we can start making like shapes that we think are cooler and changing colors and things like that. So as an example, I included a UK data service mask. So using this snippet instead, I can put custom colors in, and I can use a mask in the shape of the UK data service logo. So we start getting this like slightly more interesting view. For this coffee and tea, I would want to see it in a mug or a tea leaf or a coffee bean or something like that. And then you can also use the colors of the mask itself. So the UK data service mask there is just this like big black and white version of the UK data service logo. But if you keep the colors, you can still use those colors in a word cloud. Apologies for zooming in so much there. So if I go back to this one, now the colors will retain their position instead of just being random colors, and they're different. There are different reasons to use both of them. So now we get this cool UK data service popular words in my fake coffee and tea data set, sort of sorted by size as well. So it lets you like explore it as a viewer and see what you can discover in the same way I just discovered it, exploring the data set. And then finally, I export those frequencies to a CSV if you want to do so elsewhere. Actually, if you're watching this and you're thinking all of this Python is way too difficult and this guy Joe is going way too over my head, there's this website called wordclouds.co.uk that actually has, I think, more of the functionality than that Python package does have. And here you can upload your own mask, you can change the font size, you can choose the colors, you can choose from shapes that they support. And in this word section, you can import from a CSV. So you can go get that CSV file that you would have just exported if you're using the binder. Oh, that was it. Get the frequencies, and then you can play around with the word cloud in here. So if you can get these frequencies out, you don't need to use Python at all to get to this word cloud stage. You could have done that all in Excel and reach the same point. So now you can see tea, coffee, black, all that stuff up there. And also in here, you can edit the word list directly. So you could just be deleting those words you didn't like in here. You can lowercase them, or like a lot of these helpers are pretty standard now. So I wanted to include that in case you thought Python was difficult and you haven't learned it yet or anything like that. Right, that's the end of the demos. Give me a second. Cool. So I've shown you some of what's possible. Here are some projects I've done in the past with data like this, just to give you some inspiration if you're not sure where to start. One of my favorites, you can export private chats from WhatsApp. So here I applied that exact same sentiment analysis you just saw to make those word clouds to my closest friends to basically confirm that of my friends, Joe is the most positive, or at least a ratio of his messages have more positivity than their messages. And to me, that's a good definition of friendship. Another was a funded digital art piece. So this was a rose where you could tweet mean things to the rose, and as you did, it would sort of drip this like black poison down that would kill the rose, but also like spread through the flowers quite beautifully. And we used a white rose, so you could sort of see like the mean tweets infecting and killing a real rose. If nobody sent it a message, it would dry up because it wouldn't get water. And if you tweeted it nice things, it would get watered by like a sort of nutrition and sugar rich liquid. So it could sort of survive based on social media data in the same way we all do. And we targeted like American politics when we were testing this. So if we use certain keywords relating to like presidency, we could get a lot of negative and controversial comments really quickly just to test it out. An extension of this we didn't talk to today is another area called topic analysis. And we kind of did it at the end when we were looking for like words that are associated with taste, for example. It's quite an interesting way to sort of let the data tell you where to look instead of using your assumptions to figure out like what to explore. You might find that like if you look at vegan tweets, you might find lots of like protest or like controversial tweets are made in response to those people that might suggest they eat meat or go to barbecues or something. And it's not like an association you would start with, but that can be the foundation of a really interesting research question. So I just put that in there as well. We went through Python. I know we said Python will help, but it's not necessary. I recommend you learn it. And again, I've got linked here DataCamp, a really good website that will teach you Python for data analysis, and it has very like interactive tutorials. That's where I learned to use Python. Is it 10 years ago, 8 years ago? So that's where I got started, and I really recommend it if you haven't done it before. And thank you very much. You can contact me, Joseph Allen, probably in the YouTube comments, or if you find my website, but also if you message people at the UK Data Service and they can't answer the questions, I'm sure they'll text me or email me anyway.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone who has attended. Please do send in any questions you have. You can send them, I guess, to myself, j.casmeyer at manchester.ac.uk if you want. Or, yeah, I mean, Joe, you're available on social media, I suppose. So you can
Yeah,
find
they're locking
us.
down, but
We,
you
we
better
are
email
available.
Julia and she'll email me.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a lovely day, and I hope to see you at future sessions.